Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight, whether on Facebook Live, YouTube, or our website. I am Nathan Winkelstein, Associate Producer at Red Bull Theater and host of tonight's RemarkaBULL Podversation. For those of you joining us for the first time, these are informal conversations designed to provide insight into how great classical performers approach character and text. Part of that informal discussion is you. If you are watching this on Facebook, you can type in questions right in the Facebook chat, and we will answer as many as we can as we go along. So please do engage with us. It is designed to be as interactive as possible. This evening's Podversation will be focusing on Shakespeare's first great villain, Richard III, and the evolution of Shakespeare's writing, with specific emphasis on Richard's famous I am I speech. Our guest tonight is an acclaimed classical actor and Red Bull Theater stalwart who has wowed Red Bull audiences with his performances in Revenger's Tragedy, Duchess of Malfi, Edward II. He has performed all across the country and is one of the most passionate and articulate actors I've had the pleasure to converse with. He is Matthew Rauch.
Hi, Nathan. And hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hi, Matt. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
And of course, as our audience probably knows right now, I normally make sure we torture our guests right off the bat by making them read the speech.
Is that how it works?
Yes. So thank you in advance for doing that. But I am going to provide some context, 3.5 plays worth of context real quick for the audience.
In 30 seconds, right?
Exactly. So for everybody out there, Richard III, the King of England, not by birth, but by bloodletting, has ravaged England on his long meandering route to kingship, a route including, but not limited to, the cold-blooded direct or indirect murder of King Henry VI, his own brother Clarence, 3 children of royal blood, and multiple nobles. A challenge has been mounted to his reign, and he has traveled with his army to Bosworth Field to do battle. Now it is the night on the eve of the battle, and Richard III awakes from a fearful dream.
Give me another horse, bind up my wounds, have mercy, Jesus. Soft I did but dream. O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me? The lights burn blue. It is now dead midnight. Cold, fearful drops stand on my trembling flesh. What do I fear? Myself? There's none else by. Richard loves Richard. That is, I am I. Is there a murderer here? No. Yes, I am. Then fly. What, from myself? Great reason why, lest I revenge. What, myself upon myself? Alack, I rather love myself. Wherefore? For any good that I myself have done unto myself? Oh no. Alas, I rather hate myself for hateful deeds committed by myself. I am a villain. Yet I lie, I am not. Fool, of thyself speak well. Fool, do not flatter. My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale, and every tale condemns me for a villain. Perjury, perjury in the highest degree. Murder, stern murder in the direst degree. All several sins, all used in each degree. Throng to the bar, crying all, guilty, guilty. I shall despair. There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul shall pity me. Nay, wherefore should they? Since that I myself find in myself no pity to myself.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Yes,
right.
that's the kind of speech
it?
you applaud for, right? That's like the audience goes, "Yay!"
Yeah, it's a little weird to do it in an office chair sitting in an office, but you know.
Yes, well, the whole world's a little weird right now, I'd say.
The whole world's a little weird now. Yeah.
Largest understatement in history. So you've performed this role at Shakespeare Theatre Company DC.
I did about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Helmed by David Muse, and it was a piece that I was it was a play that I was interested in discussing on this series. And when I reached out to you, I actually think I reached out to you and suggested the "I'll have her, but I shall not keep her" long speech. And
yes, you did actually. The end of the Lady Anne scene. Yes.
Right, and you countered wanting to do this one, and after listening to you do it, and actually after having done my research before it and reading it, I can very much see why, because this is a part of Richard. I think for most of us who have this idea of Richard from the entire tetralogy, he doesn't seem like the person to have this speech.
No, it's a very unusual speech for this play, and it's really I found it to be very surprising when I came across it when I was learning the role. When I was offered this role, I, to be frank, was not particularly familiar with the play. I'd seen it a couple of times, but I had never really read it seriously. Actors fantasize about playing roles. It never occurred to me to fantasize about playing Richard III because I never thought I'd have the opportunity. You know, it's such a mythical role that when I was offered the role, I was like, wait, you've got to be kidding me. I thought it was sort of a joke. So when I dove in, the play sets up, at least in the first sort of 3.5 acts, very traditionally, almost like a Jacobean drama. He speaks to the audience. He tells them what he's going to do. He starts to do it. He refers back to the audience. He says, see what I'm doing. Isn't it going great? Or this is a problem, or this is what I have to fix. And these are the people I'm going to kill. And then you get to this moment in the play. What you didn't tell the audience is that right before this, he has a terrible dream in which all of his victims, the young boys, Buckingham, Clarence, his brother, Lady Anne, all come to him in a dream and wish him death at Bosworth Field. It's sort of a terrifying dream, and the way David staged it was quite terrifying. And so he wakes from this dream alone in his tent, terrified in the middle of the night. And then you have this kind of existential moment in a play that is not known for its existential moments.
No.
I was really fascinated by it. And having played other roles, both in the sort of very traditional Jacobean roles, and also I played Macbeth. I was surprised. I should say I was very surprised. There's a little bit of, I see what's happening on my screen. Sorry, everybody.
You look very ethereal.
I have an angelic look about me.
Yeah.
I'm on the West Coast, and so the sun has not quite gone down yet. So when it goes down,
it's how he would have set himself up in the church.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah,
with
the light behind him. Anyway, I was fascinated by the speech, and I was I talk about this speech a lot when people talk about this play, and so I was really interested, obviously, when you called and said let's have a conversation about it. And I was particularly interested in this speech because I think it's a very surprising piece of writing from this young writer who, as he gets older and more sophisticated, is going to dive into among the more profound examinations of psychology ever put on paper. But Richard is not known for that, except in this moment, which I'm interested in.
So you've opened up a couple avenues there.
Sorry.
Before we chat about Shakespeare's evolution, just for this particular speech and for you as an actor exploring this character.
Yeah. Cheers,
obviously,
everybody.
We all talk about character arcs and so on and so forth. And I would say that when reading this play externally, without really digging into the character, this speech almost feels out of left field. It doesn't feel like it's part of an arc. It feels like a cliff.
It
And
does. The whole scene feels a little out of left field, and the speech is sort of very stylistically different from what's happening in the rest of the play.
So
And I
did
found
you connect it to what happened? Did the fact that he says this speech, that he's capable of this speech,
Yeah.
did that affect your other decisions previous?
Yeah, it had to. I think it had to. Yeah, because you know where you're going. You have to know where you're going. You have to understand the road you're on every night and through the course of the run of a show. I mean, talking about the evolution of Shakespeare is a little bit out of my purview. I'm less of a Shakespeare scholar than an acting scholar. I mean, I'm interested in the craft of acting, and I've studied Shakespeare from that perspective. I don't claim to know very much about Shakespeare or Shakespeare's life.
Right.
All I know is what's on the page. Oh, that thing is happening again. Sorry.
I don't think you should apologize.
There we go.
There you go.
Well, okay. So yes, when I was preparing the play, I read it obviously several times just to begin, and was continually struck by it. And what I find myself in process trying to do is create a series of sort of chain links that go from A to B, if that makes sense. A beginning of the play and an end of a play. And then sort of fill in the blanks a little bit in terms of how you get there, in terms of what the interpretation is, what David's thoughts are about the play. And I know we're going to get to that. So yes, I was aware that you're sort of, how do I say this? I was kind of setting myself up to have this vulnerable moment. And it occurred to me that if the play is to be perceived in any, if Richard is ever going to have any sympathy or empathy from the audience, that this is the only moment that that's going to happen. To see him as a real person, which he never manifests at any other moment in the play, or if he does, it's very, very tiny little things that are easily missed. You know, he walks on stage and says, obviously now is the winter of our discontent, but in that speech, he says, here's what's going on, here's how I feel about it, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill all these people. Let's see if it happens. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, I'll be dead. Life's not worth living anyway, because my life is terrible. Right. And so to get from there to this speech, you're not going to sympathize with this character. Part of the fun of this play is sort of enjoying his fun in the play. Aren't we having fun? I'm a villain, and this is great, and let's kill some people. And if the play's going good, people are sort of with you, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. My goal and David's goal in this moment was to have people go, oh my God, there's a person there. This almost like, not like this poor guy, but oh wow, there's a human being in this, under this carapace of evil. And we had a physical carapace in our version of the production. In this moment in the play, that carapace was missing. I was actually unbraced for the only time in the play. So we leaned into it a little bit. If that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. So you say that it's a discovery for the audience to see that Richard is human, and
I hope so.
Richard himself in kind of the cliffhanger for this play in Henry VI Part 3, very much says that, if I had to sum it up, basically says, I am not human, I am other, I am I, or yes. I am like no brother, I have no brother, I am like no brother.
And this word love, which graybeards call divine, be resident in men like one another, and not in me. I am myself alone.
Exactly.
And that's a very different, I am myself alone is a very different thing from saying Richard loves Richard, that is, I am I. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I knew that speech from when I was a young actor. I used to do that speech as a monologue, down to hell, and say, I sent thee thither, I that have neither pity, love, nor fear. And then, I mean, it's a great speech.
It's an incredible speech.
But it's totally Jacobean. It's totally like, I'm the bad guy. You know, I came into the world with my legs forward. The midwives wondered and the women cried, oh, Jesus bless us. He he is born with teeth. You know, he's this monster saying, I am a monster, I'm going to kill everyone, I'm going to be king.
And so that's my
or I'm going to try to be king.
So my question then is he, did you play it then that he is putting on a show to cover his humanity, or he truly believes this, that he's not human until this moment, that he is other?
I believe it's a bit of both, actually. I don't think it's I don't think it's binary. I don't think it can be binary for a character like this. It's a big question. I believe that Richard is inherently a vain person. He is a person with a disability. People know that he is disabled, and I know we're going to get to a discussion about the disability at another point, but and he spends so much time in the play talking about his disability that I was interested in a person who is trying to look normal to the rest of the world. Normal, I don't mean to be a triggering word. I just mean that he's trying to look not disabled, I should say, to the rest of the world. That the effort, the vanity, the absolute willpower that it takes for him to look like everybody else is immense. So that he is aware of his difference with everyone, and that psychological awareness makes him want to be like everyone else. Do you know what I mean? So that he wishes he could be like everyone else. And I believe that that's laid into the first speech in the play, the Winter of Our Discontent speech. This kind of self-loathing of his own image, his inability to seduce women, his inability to appear pleasing to the world, that underneath is bubbling this person who has never been treated like a human being. All he's been treated is like the third brother, who's a fighter, a great soldier, and a monster, as he describes himself, and as other people describe him in the play. So that by the time you get to this speech, my hope was, and my goal was, that by the time we got there, there was an opportunity to sort of see what's underneath, to sort of open up and look inside and go, oh, this is a really damaged, screwed up guy. Excuse me, that's obvious for any sane person watching the play, but to actually see the pathology at work, I don't know necessarily how successful we were at that, but that was the intention, sort of. And that's what I came up with in the months that led up to the first rehearsal. And then David was on board with that, and so we sort of went from there.
I mean, it's fascinating hearing you say this, because I do think that if this monologue did not exist in this play, I think it would be very tempting to see this character as a hyper charismatic and enjoyable, but fundamentally two-dimensional.
That's exactly right. Villain. That's exactly right. He's two-dimensional without this speech, I believe. I don't mean two-dimensional like he doesn't lack imagination. None of Shakespeare's characters lack imagination. He doesn't lack depth, but there's no motive for him to do the things he does without this speech. This speech gets to his own insecurity, his belief in himself as a person, and his lack of belief in himself as a person. I was really, really struck by it. And then I made the mistake of reading Harold Bloom's essay about this play. He's not a fan of the play, and he's very much not a fan of this speech. And for once, I found myself disagreeing with him strongly about this play. And I started to really get interested in the play. And that it was actually the discovery of this speech early on in my prep process that really made me excited about it. Because I didn't remember this speech I had seen several productions of the play, and I didn't remember it from productions of the play. And I was struck by the fact that I didn't remember it, because to me, it feels like the heart of the play, which often comes in Act 4 for these characters, or the end of Act 3. And then all of a sudden I was like, here's the heart of the play, and I don't remember this. So it was just an interesting discovery.
agree completely. So I saw a
Oh,
production right. Well, yeah,
isn't that great?
that doesn't make a fun conversation, but
Yeah.
I saw a production just a little while ago as well, before I asked you to do this, and didn't think of this speech. And I think that that
There you go.
is an interesting when it is not fundamental to the character, when it is not core to the
Yeah.
character as you've made it.
Yeah.
I think it reads as almost confusing to an
I
audience member.
think
You're
it's
like, what?
very tempting. I think it's very tempting when you play Richard III. I mean, no disrespect, but even Olivier did this. It's very tempting to play the end of the play at the beginning of the play. I mean, we know he's a bad guy. We know he's going to kill all these people. But if you look at that Olivier film, if you go back and look at the beginning, he sort of looks into the camera and he goes, "Now is the winter of and you're kind of like, the play's over. Like, I know what's going to happen. I mean, I love Olivier. He was a great actor, and that performance is pretty amazing. The levels that he finds in it. I didn't watch the whole film when I was prepping this, so I haven't seen it in a long time. But he kind of twists his mustache from the beginning of the play, and I think if you do that, you lose. There's so much more ground to cover in this moment of the play. This kind of, to have this person who is so deadly, who is so twisted in his mind, who is so murderous and ambitious and venal, to be truly undone by a dream and question his existence like Hamlet is really an opportunity, I think, for an actor to kind of go to sort of travel a long distance, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, and not to get into a conversation that maybe neither you nor I are actually able to have, but about the evolution of Shakespeare's. It is interesting that, of course, you described it as the first 3 acts of this play, but really it's the first 3 2/3 plays of
Correct.
This.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the Henry VI plays. I don't know them very, very well. I know that he wrote all 3 before he wrote this play. This was, yes, I believe, the 5th play that he wrote. I believe it was published in 1590. I want to say 2 or 3, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I don't know where Comedy of Errors and Taming fall in there. They might have both been before. It's a little... someone out there probably knows and is writing it in the Facebook chat right now.
Sorry, Shakespeare scholars. We don't know exactly. But, I know it's an early play. And it's when I started the play, David Muse, who directed it, who runs the studio theater in Washington, D.C., David said to me, it feels like a young playwright's play. It's a young playwright trying out a lot of things. The play sort of extant is very, very long. It's a little bit unwieldy. If you do the play, it's almost impossible to do it without adapting the text. First of all, because it could be 4 hours long. And second of all, because there's all this English history stuff that, frankly, to an American audience is just, right over your head. You're just never going to understand who these people are, why they're doing what they're doing. And he said, however, there's this core, there's this kind of kernel of great villain sort of laid into this thing. It's like his first attempt at writing this kind of great Jacobean villain, and David said to me at some point, and this is, I think, actually the best sort of conceptual direction he gave me. He said, imagine Shakespeare had written a play and said, I'm going to write a great villain, and I'm going to write a great villain who's a great actor, not a good actor, but a great actor, so that in every single scene, he is acting differently. He's a true sociopath. This is sort of another conversation, but he wrote it for Burbage. He wrote the role for Burbage. This I know. Burbage is the first person to play it, which is intimidating enough when you go to play these roles. Mm-hmm. And Burbage was obviously a great actor, the greatest of his time. And the ability to be a true sociopath, to believe in every moment of the play a slightly different point of view. And we were interested in how power affected his sociopathy, how power affected his ability to sort of adapt to moments, that genius ability to sort of read the room, change your tack, and just kind of go in for the kill. And he does it so well. And then later in the canon, when you get to the 2 great villains are Iago and Macbeth. There are others. Sorry, Shakespeare scholars.
They're the best.
Those two men, or two characters, I should say, when, it's a little different for Macbeth because he doesn't begin the play in that sort of sociopathic place. But Iago's ability to kind of worm his way into the little tiny cracks in the sidewalk and then just pry them apart, to me, is rooted in Richard III.
And that's another role. I mean, talk about another role where the absolute pitfall is the mustache twirl. Is that if you don't live up to the fact that every other person in that role in that play calls him Honest Iago, you're doing the whole
My
play.
My COVID mustache is giving me away, I guess, right?
Yeah, we had so last week I had Chuck Wudiawuji on, who I know you know.
Oh, Chuck, yeah.
Yeah, and actually doing not your predecessor, I guess technically your brother is your predecessor, but doing the king you murdered. Doing
Henry VI. Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I saw the email about that. Yeah. How was that conversation?
It was wonderful. Chuck is wonderful. I suggest to the audience, shameless pitch, check it out.
Chuck Wudiawuji, great actor, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely great actor.
In that, Chuck made I think it's a point that we all know, but then sometimes forget to articulate, that the definition of drama, actually quite literally in terms of the Greek, the definition of drama is turbulence. Mm-hmm. And that an internal character's drama means that there has to be some internal clash. So for Henry VI, he was a king who didn't want to be king. And but it is interesting that it almost seems in this character that Shakespeare figures out that a great villain is only great if there's something internal that is going on as well. He can't be flawlessly a perfect villain.
That's very good.
And this speech gives it to him. It gives him that other side.
Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, my acting teacher, my sort of great acting teacher, Ron Daniels, who used to work at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre and Royal Shakespeare Company and is now in the United States and is still a mentor and friend. He used to say that it's very important to find a sort of contradiction in every moment of the play, the things you want and the things you need, and to take those two things and put them in opposition to each other, actively in opposition to each other while you're playing in a scene. And it's not always easy to do in this play at the beginning of the play, because it was hard for me to sometimes figure out what the opposition was, the internal opposition, not the obstacle. I mean, Lady Anne is a good example, right? The obstacle is that Lady Anne is never going to want to have anything to do with him. He killed her husband, he killed her father. She's, absolutely not, That's the obstacle. It's very, very clear what the obstacle is to overcome in the scene.
Right.
But the contradiction, the internal contradiction, is hard to find. Once I found this speech and discovered this speech for myself, which I think speaks to his kind of existential insecurity of his place in the world, of his existence, of why he is there, and this gets back to your original question. I guess I did immediately sort of lay it on top of the psychological world of the beginning of the play, so that I've never actually thought about this before, but it occurs to me that even at the opening moments of the play, that Richard who exists in Act 4 was sort of bubbling underneath, and that served as something to sort of bounce off against always.
Yeah, in some ways it's his, it feels like you take it, and you've made me a believer, as basically his touchstone. It is his true center. Yeah. Can I ask before because you've mentioned Macbeth a couple of times, and I think the Macbeth Richard III symbiosis / differences are fascinating, and I'd love to get into it because I know you've played that role too. Before we do, there's two relationships in this play between Richard and other characters that I'm fascinated by, and I just love your opinion on them.
Sure.
One is, and you can handle them in any order, is him and Margaret, perhaps the only other person in the tetralogy who is his equal in some ways in terms of viciousness and power. And then
and the only character, by the way, other than Richard, who goes through the entire tetralogy. She is She's in the whole thing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Again, we'll get a Facebook comment.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Sorry.
No, she's definitely in all of them. I'm actually not sure if Richard shows up until part 2.
Okay. Fair enough.
But he's certainly spoken of. And then the other one is, since he brings her up quite a bit, and there is a scene, is his mom. So I'm curious about the relationships with those two women. You can tackle them in any order or ignore the question.
Margaret's complicated. His mother, yeah, I don't even know where to begin. I think in some ways, Richard's Achilles heel is women, are women. He doesn't know how to see women. And this is a very, very 21st century way of interpreting a play. And I completely acknowledge that. But it occurred to me that he doesn't know how to see women in any way other than objectified. And they are simply things to him, things to be manipulated, things to be seduced, things to be
thrown aside.
He's discarded. Yeah, he's so damaged. The psychology of this man felt very, it's interesting. His psychology felt very clear while I was in it and playing the role. And now that it's a year later or a year and a half or whatever it is, it feels very murky to me. That's not true, interestingly enough, with Macbeth, which is a much sort of cleaner, simpler, shorter, sort of knife-like play. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. Darko, who directed it, had a very clear idea. We came up with a very simple interpretation. We made some unusual choices. And I can remember, I don't remember all the words, but I remember the kind of psychological journey through the play. This play feels a little more murky to me. I think part of that has to do with the youngness of the writing. I think part of that has to do with, to be perfectly frank, some murkiness maybe in the production that might have come from me or that might have come from other things. I think I've really punted on your question, though.
I'm trying to decide how much to pin you down on it. I mean, reason there's a couple of reasons I'm.
Tell me why you bring it up, and then maybe we can talk about it.
So I bring them up for two different reasons. I bring up Margaret because it's an easy thing for me to say at the top of the Podversation that Richard III is the first great villain. I'm actually not certain that's true. I think Margaret may be the first great villain. And so her, whether or not you decide she's a villain, but that speech on the molehill is wild. And so
it's pretty great.
There's this sort of, and the give and take in that first scene where Margaret shows up and Richard is there and they're sort of playing this, they're fencing while the others are observing. They're
in the court.
Fencing.
That's Act 1, Scene 3, I believe.
Yeah.
Might be Act 1, Scene 4.
Feels like two equals going at it, to me as I read it. Feels like two equals going at it in a way that one almost never feels Richard engages with.
Right.
And so that was my question about Margaret, is because it almost feels like a passing of the torch there. And the mother is about the psychopathy, right? The mother is, the mother seems to spook him a little bit in a way that no one else does, in a very particular way. So I was just curious if you had built that in. And you can ignore that one.
Well, no, I mean, in a funny way, the mother is more clear to me. I mean, she's, in our version of we cut the play, David and Craig Baldwin, who actually used to work at Red Bull, who was assisting him on this production, they cut the play radically. We shortened the play significantly. We rearranged things. We assigned things to different characters. We took characters out. We made Catesby bigger. We did a lot of stuff to the play. One of the things that happened as a result of that was that Richard's mother was in the play even less than she is in the full play. That actually, to me, worked as an advantage. That amazing scene where she sort of turns her back on him at the end, I think it's at the end of Act 3. but I don't remember exactly. Felt to me the other moment when Richard is truly undone. It's the moment in which he wants things the most. And what he wants the most is the thing that he's never had and the things he's never going to get, which is for his mother to love him. You know, mommy didn't love me, may be trite, but it's a really, really great way to activate your psychology in a performance. And Sandra Shipley, who played the role, was magnificent. She's incredibly heartfelt and she's incredibly tough. And there was a moment in the scene where she just completely shut off. She just shut down and turned her back and walked away. And I remember there were people in the audience who would sort of gasp, and in my inside, I remember thinking, don't go, Mom. Come back. I just want a hug. I just want a pat on the head. I just want someone to tell me I'm doing a good job, even though I know deep down I'm not doing a good job because I'm a terrible person. So all of that sort of played into that sort of bubbling doubt, existential doubt, which to me is essential. This is sort of a performance thing, but that kind of insecurity is essential in my mind to creating a three-dimensional person. Nobody's not insecure. Well, some people are not insecure, but they're total psychopaths. I don't believe that Richard is a total psychopath. I do believe that he's a sociopath because he doesn't know how to love, because he's never been loved. And I guess that's rooted in his mom. See, now that we're talking about it, I'm sort of remembering.
Yeah, well, I was no, it's great. That was what I was hoping. It seemed like it made
Margaret's
sense
a whole other thing. Margaret,
right.
I'll be honest. I'm just going to be honest, and maybe somebody in the audience wants to chime in about this. I never really understood what Margaret was doing in the play and what that relationship was all about. We never, I don't feel like I ever in my mind cracked what that big scene in Act 1 is about, what she's doing, the curse that she lays on, Margaret's curse. There's such a specific thing about her in the play. And I think there's a part of me that intellectually understands it, but I never actually internalized it.
It feels to me like one that's easier for me personally.
I'm going to read the play while we talk.
Yeah, there we go. It's easier for me to understand knowing the entire tetralogy because she is so much more important in that. But always has a thing about that grumbling Dickie, your boy. She always has a thing about you. Every time she describes the three brothers, she takes a little longer to describe you. Yeah. And it's just an interesting, I've always wondered about that kind of transference of one villain to the other passing, ships passing in the night equals conversation. But we don't need to, I don't need to pin you down on that because I really am curious
it's
about
okay.
Macbeth.
Oh, yeah.
So
I've heard of that play.
Yeah, it's and luckily neither of us are in theaters, so we're all good. And actually, I'm realizing before I get into Macbeth, cliffhanger. Before we leave this production, actually, I have a guest on who asked a question, who put in a question for us, and who I've had on the show to ask it of you.
A Richard question.
A question for Richard, and actually the production you had in Shakespeare at Shakespeare Theatre Company. This is June Barfield. She is she's an acting coach and a writer in LA, and she had a question about the production you were in. Go ahead, June. Hi.
Hi.
I loved your reading, by the way.
Thank you very much.
It was very close to what I would have imagined it to be. Did you have a different interpretation of the character in the play prior to this production with Mr. Muse? And if so, what was it?
A different interpretation. Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, I had never really explored the play deeply before I got this role. There were roles, and are still roles, that I'm dying to play. Richard felt so, as I said to Nathan at the beginning, so mythological to me that I never really sort of went there in exploring it. I had never had an opportunity to work on any of these speeches as a student. It's a play I did not know well. The the interpretation of the character began sort of with a somewhat superficial but important conversation, which had to do with the disability of this character. That's where we started. I was very self-conscious about being a not disabled actor playing a disabled role. And I had a long talk with David about how we were gonna, what Richard's disability was, and how we would convey that, and how we would manage that, with, I think, very legitimate questions about why did you hire an able-bodied, not able-bodied, but a non-disabled actor to play a disabled person. That was the root of the interpretation of the role. Was coming up with a disability that felt real, but was not, oh, Richard's in a wheelchair, or Richard has polio, or Richard is, I felt very uncomfortable about that stuff. And so we essentially just made it up. And in making it up, that gave us freedom, or I think that gave us freedom to, in some ways, expand the psychology of this person. And then when I discovered that Act 4 speech, not to make too nice a bow on this, but when I came to that Act 4 speech, it actually dovetailed really nicely with this kind of invented version of Richard, who was both fantastical and sort of more real. And that, I don't know if that fully answers your question.
Can I perhaps expand on the question a little bit, and ask if this is one of those roles that you are interested in doing again? And if so, do you
Are you offering?
Where?
Yes,
if you,
absolutely.
Do you have
100%.
anything you've learned from the first production that you would want to do? You would want to, let's not say do differently, but you would want to evolve in a certain direction with for a secondary production?
That gets into a slightly tricky place, because that, it's hard to talk about productions that you've done before and feel, I don't necessarily feel comfortable being critical of the production that we did. But I know that's not your intention at all,
Yeah.
but I was aware that there were things that I felt like we missed, that we focused on sort of in lieu of focusing on things that I felt personally were important to focus on. So,
just different priorities.
June, just to go back to your question, I've been thinking about your question. Sorry, Nathan, I'll come back to you.
Please.
The real answer to your question is I didn't have a different interpretation from David, because I didn't have an interpretation. I was kind of making it up. I was prepping the role as I was meeting with David. We met 3 or 4 times before rehearsals began, as I was in the process of learning the words, which is, I'm always interested in these larger roles, and you have to know the words before you go into rehearsal. You're just really screwed. There's just no time. And so I was having kind of extensive conversations with David while I was kind of pouring the play into my head. And so we were very like-minded, particularly in that process. I think in rehearsal things changed a little bit, as they have to change. It was a big production. There were a lot of actors. We were doing other things. There was this whole kind of series of movement sequences in the play that didn't really involve me, and that were incredibly elaborate and required a lot of work, frankly. And so David and I were less connected during the rehearsal process than I think I personally would have liked. I'm not critical of him for that. I just think that was sort of, that's what happened. So to answer your question, no, we didn't have a different interpretation, because I didn't have one. And sort of to answer your question, Nathan, if I were going to do it again, I'd love to do it with David, but I'd say to him, I want to be more connected with you during the rehearsal process. I want you to get into my head. That's very, very important with plays like this, with roles like this, to have a partner, someone whose hand you're holding, who can see you from the outside, who is saying, who is modulating things and talking to you about, or at least for me, it's important to be talked to about the minutia of what are happening, because by hooking into the minutia, the larger sort of umbrella grows more sophisticated, I think. Does that answer your question, June? I hope so.
Yes, you did. Of course, I would have loved to have seen the production. If I had seen it, I'd have probably a deeper question to ask you. But I can understand not visiting this character. I can understand a lot of actors not visiting this character.
It's too mythological. So many. I mean, it's Burbage and Olivier. I mean, who am I? You know, I saw Sir Ian McKellen play the role. I mean, who am I to play Richard III?
I know.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you a funny story. I was in a hotel room. I got a call from my agent. I called her. I was working on a TV show. I called her back and I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Do you have any interest in going to the Shakespeare Theater to work on Richard III next winter?" This was, I don't know, in like September or August or something, and it was starting in January. And I said, "Which role?" assuming it was Buckingham, because people have said to me for years and years, "You should play Buckingham. It's a terrific role. You'd be great." And I didn't really know the play very well. And then she started to laugh and she said, "Richard." And I said, "What are you talking about? No way. There's no way they offered me this role." So it was very, very thrilling. So to answer another question that I didn't answer before, absolutely, I would like to return to this play. I'd return to this play in a heartbeat. Yeah. It's such a great role. It's such a great ride. It's really, really fun.
June, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, June.
It's really been great having you on.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, indeed.
And for any of you who's interested in June Barfield, she is an acting coach, and you can actually find her blog if you look her up in LA, if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And I believe she is actually writing a post soon about this play on her blog, so keep an eye out for that. This is always our problem, Matt, whenever we talk, is we burn through an hour like this. So
what time is it? Oh, wow.
It is, yeah, so much for Henry V, all that stuff. But I do think that we've chatted a little bit.
Look at all these speeches I looked at. Come on, Nathan, what are we going to do, man?
I know, we'll talk to Jesse and maybe we can do a two-parter.
Great.
But I do know that you also played Macbeth, and that we
both
share some sort of theories and belief that Richard III is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I'll just say it myself, is something of a first draft of what becomes, or an early version of what eventually evolves into an extremely experienced writer writing Macbeth, even from tying it back into what we talked about from the beginning, taking the moral conundrum of conscience versus villainy and putting it there right from the beginning of the play.
Correct.
And I'm curious how you found, having played both, I'm curious if you felt much connection between the two and how they commented on one another.
Only rarely. Macbeth is a very, very different experiential process. That play is so dark and so supernatural. Those of you who have heard me talk about this play will forgive me for repeating myself. I've always believed that the proper interface with Macbeth is sort of true horror. That the laughs in that play are hollow laughs, and the darkness of that play is sort of manifest. Richard certainly is a dark play and is certainly an evil play about an evil person. But there is, again, this kind of Jacobean otherness to it. He comments on himself throughout the play. Macbeth is in the play. It's happening to him while you watch, and his horror and his immersion in that process is complete. Now, perhaps, talking about it now, I missed something in Richard III, and this would be a good reason to go back and look at the play. I wonder if there's a way to immerse yourself in Richard that sort of steeped in that darkness, but I just don't think the play functions that way. There's a fun to Richard. He's having fun while he seduces Lady Anne. He's having fun at the beginning of the play. He's even having fun in the court scenes later in the play, where he's messing around with Buckingham, when he tricks Hastings. All of that stuff is playful. Oh, there's Cody.
Hey,
That's
Hi,
Cody Nichol, who played my brother, Clarence, and also one of the murderers. That's one of the murderer scenes from, I believe, Act 4, maybe Act 3, end of Act 3, early Act 4, in our production of the play. Macbeth, I had wanted to play Macbeth like every other actor in the world for years and years, and I'd looked at the play extensively. And so when Darko Trezniak, who ran the Hartford stage at the time, offered me the job, I was very excited. I felt very like I'd been waiting 20 years to have an opportunity to do it. I love that play. I do think that in Richard is the seed, is the DNA of all of these, of many sort of roots of Shakespeare's explorations going forward. Not to put myself, I'm not James Shapiro, but I do think that.
Who is?
Yeah, nobody is James. I do think that roots of Henry IV and Henry V, in Henry IV, the "I Know You All" speech, and in Henry V, the "Upon the King" speech is an exploration of what it is to be king. I think part of that is rooted in Richard III. I think Hamlet, "Oh, that this too solid flesh," "Oh, that this to be or not to be," frankly, I think is rooted in questions that come up in Richard III. I think the evil of Iago, and what's he then that says I play the villain, is rooted in Richard III. I think Angelo in Measure for Measure is rooted in Richard III. I certainly think that Edmund in Lear is rooted in Richard III. And ultimately, I think Macbeth, the great villain of Shakespeare, along with Iago, is inherently rooted in Richard. That the seed of that, the tree of Macbeth, comes from a seed that is made with Richard. So they're related, certainly. Richard doesn't have the imagination that Macbeth has. Macbeth has this insane imagination. He sees the whole field all the time. And it's so fun to play the horror of that and the knowledge of that and the kind of opposing darkness of that. He sees the tidal wave coming at him and sort of stands there and waits for it to come. Richard is just like, hey, it's coming, whatever, let's kill people. Cool.
Well, unfortunately, we are running towards the end of the time. Matt,
I'm just talking away. I'm sorry.
No. What I would say actually is, I can't necessarily promise this, but I will try to promise this, that you have just in this conversation given, I think, 2 topics for future Podversations. One being Macbeth, obviously, but the other one you mentioned right at the beginning that I'm fascinated about, that we'll have to have a conversation with someone at some point on this, and maybe it'll be you and I again, is I think your point about the difference of the audience interactions that these early Jacobean style, even though I realize Jacobean is later, the Richard III style, hey, look at me go, you external audience, versus the Macbeth, help me with my internal, is a massive evolution that probably deserves its own conversation.
I'll just be honest. I looked at a lot of speeches. I spent the weekend sort of thinking about the roots of this stuff, and to me, even the evolution from Richard saying Richard loves Richard, I am that is I am I, to Henry V's exploration, which is just a few years later, in Act 4, the Upon the King speech, which is an extraordinary speech. That the internalness of that versus the externalness of that. And then Macbeth is an extreme example, and in some ways a great example because it's such a late play. Macbeth's ability to say to the audience, this supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. So to actually present a problem that he is having, that he is working out while he is interacting with the audience. That's very different from Richard saying, here's what I'm going to do. So check out what I'm going to do, because I have this idea and let's see if it works. Macbeth says, in the moment, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If this, if that, I'm not sure. I think I'm going to do it. Here's my wife. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden he's like, and then after saying, I think I'm going to do it, he says, I can't do it. We're not doing this. And she says, get in there and kill him. You know, so the drama is really set up for you. And so to me that, you know,
it's the difference between inviting someone to watch Richard III and inviting someone to be with, to actually exist with it, with you.
Come inside my head,
right,
and experience what I am figuring out. Richard is in some ways, I don't want to diminish it because there's nothing diminishing about it, but he is a little bit an MC.
I was about to say he's like a host. He's like a host of his own show.
He's a circus master.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening.
There's
Come on in. I'm going to show you. And then sometimes he sort of things happen, like he'll do a thing and then he'll be like, see that? You see what I did? It's so cool. Check this out. Hang on a second. Whoa. And then he goes away, right? Macbeth is in a scene and then he comes out and he goes, what the hell is happening right now? Do you see what's happening? I have to think about this. Help me figure this out. And there's an opportunity in Macbeth to actually use the audience as a sounding board, to ask them questions, to need things from them. In Richard, that doesn't exist, except in the speech in Act 4, except when he says, I love myself. Why do I love myself? I'm a terrible person. And if I die, no one will care. No one will care. And to me, that is the root of the humanity that you find in Iago, Macbeth, Othello, Angelo, Hamlet, that Shakespeare is. I mean, yes.
When he's in the temple.
In Antony and Cleopatra. To me, if you look at Shakespeare's plays as an exploration of the meaning of existence, right? In these early plays, he's just starting to work on the problem. And then as he goes forward, I guess in the tragedies and the romances, he's noodling on this problem. And then he finally kind of gets there, particularly with Lear and Macbeth and Antony and Cleopatra and The Tempest and, you know, Troilus and Cressida.
Well, Matt, as the perfect dramatist you are, you wrapped that up perfectly with a bow, bringing it all back around to that speech. We're going to call it there because we are unfortunately out of time.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. I know it flies with you, Matt.
It really does go fast, yeah.
True pleasure.
Sorry if I'm just running my mouth. I love to talk about this stuff. It's
my gosh,
very exciting
I think that's why people watch. So
makes me really miss theater. This is obviously a crazy, insane time, and really makes me miss.
We'll be back. We'll recover. Yeah. Shakespeare is a good message for us there too. We will recover from this. Yeah. Matt, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, to watch, and I'm very, very grateful to you, Nathan, and to Jesse, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, sir. Wear a mask. Wear a mask. Everybody wear a mask.
Wash your hands. And please do tune in next evening for a remarkable Podversation where I sit down with two-time Tony winner and Red Bull regular Stephen Spinella to discuss Shakespeare's melancholic enigma, Jaques, from As You Like It, a role Stephen played in Shakespeare in Central Park production in 2012. If any of you are interested in appearing on the program to ask a question of Stephen, please do look for upcoming emails from us with a link to submit your questions. And finally, these are difficult times financially, and there's lots of causes to be giving to right now. If you are able and have the means, please do consider making a tax-deductible donation to support Red Bull and invest in the vitality of classical theater for a contemporary audience. We do want to come back, and your help will help us do that. We're committed to continuing connection during this time of COVID-19, and your support will help make that possible. Once more, thank you all. This has been Red Bull Theater's RemarkaBULL Podversations, and I'm your host, Nathan Winkelstein. We end, more hopefully than honestly, with the final words of this play from Richmond. Now civil wounds are stopped, peace lives again. That she may long live here, God say amen. Good night.